How on earth are we supposed to talk about employee engagement without talking about technology? It is absolutely permeating in how we work, how we engage, and it's certainly become a much bigger topic as we talk about return to work, return to office, the Great Resignation, remote work. And in this episode, we're going to dig into it, but from the communication side of things. Hold on. You're listening to Relationships at Work. I'm Russel Lawliker, the host of your journey on this employee experience and workplace culture podcast. Thank you once again for joining me. Love having you here. Me, you, having this experience together. Kind of nice, right? Yeah, sorry, my the cold is still there. You can still definitely hear it in the back of my throat. It's lingering. It will not leave me. Mentally, I am prepared to move on with my life. My body, on the other hand, completely having different thoughts on that. So we will trudge on. Today we're talking about technology. And you know what? A couple episodes into the podcast now, I'm amazed I haven't talked about it more. Really, I am. Because technology is such a big part of how we work now. The ease in which it helps us work, or the challenges, or the restrictions, or the innovation. It's such a part of the employee experience and workplace culture, and I know I'll be talking about this quite a lot. But engagement, experience, culture, it digs into the communication side of things. So our guest today has a few thoughts on this. Definitely when it comes to communication with live chat, the good, the bad, the pros, the cons, because there, as much as there might be a good side to this, there is certainly the dark side. And we'll get into all that as I'm very excited to welcome Brandon Caudle to the podcast. Let's go have a chat with him. This here's the podcast, and this here is our guest. It's Brandon Caudle, and here's why he's awesome. He's the Senior IT Customer Support Manager for First American Title, which is leading the technical customer support to their employees. That's what he does. He leads with IT and customer support. I like people that like people. He's been heavily involved formally with HDI, which is the world's largest service and support professional association. He's a former member of their board of directors. Lots of pride in his high school, apparently computer science. I didn't want to take that away from him. He was really insistent I put that in his bio. And he, fun fact, keynote speaker for an Inspiration Day conference in Sweden. Sweden. Congratulations to all that tech guy. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Russell. I'm waving. I don't know if anybody can see me through somehow the audio. I'm hoping that all of our listeners, though, they really focus on this part and they imagine me waving. And that's really the purpose of it.
Maybe it's the wind waving past the microphone. Maybe that's what they'll get from it. But it's the theater of the mind, Brandon. It's the theater of the mind. Tom, as you learned in radio school, theater of the mind. So first question, we're talking about technology, employee engagement with technology. So I guess my first question is, and I ask all my guests these questions, so you're not special, Brandon. So I will ask you, the first question is, what's the best or worst employee experience you've ever had?
Oh, wow. So the best that I've ever had, I would say, actually, I was a guest at a company. I did go to Sweden to speak at a keynote. I was a keynote for a customer experience-based conference there. They're a very nice company, flew me there and put me up. And they said, hey, you want to come to our office and look at it for a day? We'll get you there a day early or so you can, acclimate time zone before you got to speak. And I went to their office, and they have a custom, I believe it's only in Sweden from looking it up, of this at least 10 in the morning, and there's some in the afternoon too, coffee called fika, F-I-K-A, which is coffee spelled backwards and drop the letter. And there's a huge story about the fear of overthrowing the government way back when and how fika came to be. I just thought it was very cool, this employee experience, that everyone stopped working and they got together there in their little kitchen and everyone had coffee and a pastry, and they just talked about things. And literally like 10 minutes later, it's like everyone just left and went back. And I'm like, this was cool. And so I actually introduced it on my team in our non-peak seasons to Fika Fridays. And we were only able to do a few last year, but we're hoping that we'll be able to do them again this year, where people can just get off the phones, get on video, no matter where they are in the U.S., have a coffee, or like in my case here, a green tea, and just talk. And the important thing is that leadership, we jump in, say hi, and then we leave. So people can talk about whatever they want to. They want to talk about the latest movie that came out. They want to talk about who went skiing, whatever it is. But I felt that was a cultural employee experience that seems to be very common in Sweden, and I've enjoyed a little bit here in the U.S.
So I'm trying to understand why you think technology is going to make employee engagement, workplace culture better.
I'm glad you actually asked me that. So kind of going to do a little shout out for my high school way back when, and I actually was in the computer science club. There were, I think, 5 of us if I go get the yearbook. So think some very old, early personal computers, not mainframe, wasn't Bill Gates level. And so the technology that we had then compared to today, and that's kind of really where I'm coming from, 30 plus years of how technology has changed and made for better the employee experience, the workplace, relationships at workplace. But it also, there's that flip side of the coin. It can also make it worse. So I am someone who tries to leverage the good in technology while recognizing that there'll be parts that might not be so good. And so I think that technology, and here's my big thing I've been trying to do for a while with folks, is it's a force multiplier. It is something that when used in a correct way, and I say because there's not just the, when it's used in a correct way, one of many possible correct ways, it really can make employee relationships, peer-to-peer, supervisory, and by extension, with customers, it can make them so much better, but we have to watch out because it can also be worse.
So I guess if you're an organization and you're looking at your employee engagement and you're looking, okay, man, we got to improve this. What kind of problems do you think would be fixed by incorporating technology into the organization?
Well, first thing I think that it can fix, doesn't mean it will, is communication. Communication is one of the biggest problems in all relationships. Work, personal relationships, communication is a big deal, misunderstanding people. So going back, I like to think, and I would talk to folks like, okay, think about the first job you ever had, right? And now that might be different for my kids. Their first job wasn't that long ago. But for many of us, maybe we're in our 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s listening to this. Our first job, if we were going to call out, we were sick, we'd probably have to pick up a phone. The phone might be cordless. It might have a long cord that's stuck on a kitchen wall, and your mom, if this is a high school job, be like, hey, don't take that phone down the hallway. And we'd have to call. We'd have to wait for somebody to pick up. We might have to, okay, they didn't call, I got to call back. I got to make sure they know that I'm sick today. This is just one simple example. Today, way different world. So for instance, on a team that I run, those teams know if you're going to be out, doesn't matter. Are you sick? Is your child sick? Do you got to go do something emergency? You're not mentally here. You can't do this work today. Even in the middle of the night, you just text us. You text your supervisor. You text the other supervisor. You include me on it, and boom, it's so much easier. And of course, we have a process there, right, Russell? Like if you don't get an answer back in 5 minutes, you need to call, even if it's in the middle of the night, and be like, hey, I'm at the ER. I had to take my mom in. I had to take my kid. I don't feel good. I can't do it. We're gonna be like, okay, we got it. We will groggily, get online and let the rest of the team know that that's happening. But that's just one example of how technology gives time back to the employee. of you don't have to do this. It's very rare now that we find an employee who doesn't have a smartphone. I did have one a few years ago, and I remember the day that he announced to us that he was getting a smartphone. We were like, whoa, we had a little party there at work. Like, this is cool. He's getting a smartphone. And then he shared pictures with us when he goes on vacation with his kids and family and things like that. So I would say that's just an example of how technology can make it easier. I know there's a whole deep topic there about texting and do you have to respond after work? There's a whole bunch we can go into if there's time later, because it's not necessarily cut and dry. It can be used for good, and I chose to give you the good side there, not the can be used for Skynet.
When I think of technology, there's texts. There's also chat. Like, for instance, like programs like Teams is one. People also use Skype, which I hear is going away, if it hasn't already by the time somebody listens to this podcast. There's this asynchronous, I think that's the right one, or asynchronous. Anyway, it's the way of communicating so people can do this chat. I mean, text is kind of that as well. Where do you feel the technology fits well and hurts when it comes to communication?
I actually have to go look up the history of chat to figure out when did I first use chat. And in the late 90s, AOL, AIM, and then Yahoo Messenger and MSN, and then we get forward into corporations started using it in the 2000s, and we had Skype. And I remember when I was introduced to Jabber and all the different ones where it never turned off. And you would leave work or sign off. And at that time, I was working with a software company, a small software company, and you might close your phone or your laptop at 10:30 at night, and overnight, those developers are working and they're posting. That's that exactly, and I'm probably going to massacre the word too, asynchronous, I believe, communication. It was, hey, I've got this code for this customer I'm working on. I posted this in GitHub. Can somebody take a look at it? And so there was that channel in the company's communication that we used. And in the morning, maybe at 5 a.m., maybe somebody on the East Coast woke up and said, oh, I know how to do that. And they would put their code in there. And so that was my first real big introduction to that, because I think before that in the 2000s, companies kind of just dabbled in it. It was like, hey, this is cool, you can chat. But we were still stuck on this thing of like, well, maybe I'll walk down the hallway and talk to Sally, or maybe I'll call Janine on the phone because she's in Pennsylvania and I'm in Seattle. And so when Teams and Slack entered the chat, when they came along, that was really revolutionary, because it all of a sudden built up, and then boom, everybody's using them. And I think that these are powerful, not just for asynchronous communication, but I'm going to say near real time, like millisecond off of real time communicating amongst your team. And I have a very specific example that I wanted to share as soon as you asked me. Way back in the olden days, like in 2019, when I worked in an office, we had some folks that were in our office here in Southern California, and we had many folks who were scattered across the United States and other countries, offshore folks in various places. And so sometimes, as I was walking to my desk, walking to talk to somebody, get some help, I would notice a support person who might turn to their coworker, their colleague, and say, hey, Janelle, I got a question. How do you do this? So we had kind of a little fun where I would, they would talk it out, and I go, hey, Janelle, Bob, I got a question. And they all knew what this was, so it was no harm meant. Do you hate the rest of the people on the team? They're like, well, no, I love them. They're great. I'm like, well, why do you keep that information from them? Because they probably want to know how to do that as well. They want to know how to solve that technical issue. And they're like, oh, yeah. And then they would turn and they would put it in that Teams or Slack or whatever chat. They would put it in there so everybody else could see it. Well, with the pandemic, so a little over 2 years ago, everybody went home. Everybody went remote. Now, that doesn't mean everybody. We still know some people were commuting in and doing this. But all of a sudden, we were asking all the questions in our work chat, in Teams, in Slack, in other tools as well. And we were putting it out there in a channel that said, like, here's your support channel, here's your software channel, here's whatever it is. And we're saying, hey, I'm working on this ticket and this knowledge article, and I got to step 3 and this doesn't work. And all of a sudden, 70 people are like, whoa, I had that yesterday too. And then you're getting somebody with the knowledge who's near real time. You know, they might actually have their eyeballs on another screen and they might have a customer in the air, but they're saying, oh yeah, here you go. The server changed. Let me update it. And so boom, all of a sudden it's like we get 70 or 50 or 20, however many people in a room, but it's very Neo Matrix, and they were almost all plugged in to that conversation. And so that's one of the good examples that I feel strongly, based on data that we see, not just in my company, but talking with others, that knowledge-centered service, KCS, took a huge leap forward with support, all kinds of support, technical support, customer experience, as far as like our contact centers. It took a huge leap forward in the year 2020 because we were forced into, well, I can't turn to Janelle, but I'm going to chat it. And that way everybody can see it. And some really forward companies have even taken those chats and said, hey, we're going to put a little feature in here so that if you want to make that into a knowledge article, you just highlight it and click the button, and then it makes a knowledge article. Sure, we can clean it up later and put screenshots in and augment it, but it's just a force multiplier because all of a sudden you got everybody's brain. It's almost like a hive mind in there, just and it swarms, and you can see people are posting screenshots. Yeah, look at this on the server. Hey, look at, and so I think that there's a tremendous potential that we've unleashed, and I don't ever see it going back.
It's fantastic. I love that you've, and I appreciate that you've done this, is that you said that it's not about knowledge transfer. It is, but what it's about is almost this tapping into immediacy of community. It's this, suddenly you've got 70 minds either reviewing information they needed, or they can add, almost like an organic wiki in the moment as it's sort of happening. But also it sort of flies in the face of a lot of people that says, well, we don't have culture unless we're all in the same room. Well, I know people that are literally on these Slack channels to somebody that is 3 doors down from them, that they could easily get up and move to their seat. But within that community of knowledge transfer, it's shared by everyone to the community, as opposed to those 2 people face to face. I love that.
Well, now, don't get me wrong, Russell. There is still a lot of, and I've heard many companies over the past 2 years say, hey, we couldn't adjust, you know, our like accountants or underwriters or something that's like, they would walk down a hall. They were in Pittsburgh and they would walk down a hall. You know, I've heard so many friends, colleagues, like, people couldn't adjust. They couldn't adjust to, well, can you pick up the phone? And it wasn't that they could not. It was just a habit change, right? They'd walk down the hall for 22 years and it asked, you know, hey, Shrikesh, can you help me? And to be quite honest, many people still struggle with that. Many people still yearn for that. So, you know, I don't know if this is a spoiler for anybody in the podcast, but we have not yet developed time travel. So, you know, we cannot.
Spoilers, Brandon. Spoilers. Jesus.
Right. So we cannot go back to 2019 in processes, in different things. Instead, what we need to do is multiply what we have to try and go forward and make it better, and use the chat for good. Now, I mean, I don't know if we want to bring it up, but there's actually a bad side as well to that.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole, I'm thinking right away of, you know, being that accessible all the time through a chat could also have some scary ramifications. What do you have for an example? What are you thinking?
Well, I don't know. I don't have it on top of me. But for instance, I think a couple countries in Europe did it, and I think maybe a couple states is actually passed laws that said, hey, if you're an hourly employee and not exempt from overtime, your boss can't call you after work. You can't just say, hey, you want to do this? Because, right, every law comes out of something. There was exactly what you said. And that software company I mentioned a long time ago, That was kind of the pain but it's always on. And hey, we'll help you install it on your phone so you can always respond. And so that can be a problem. But this kind of leads into the biggest spoiler of all, which is technology is an enabler or an exacerbator, but it's not the solution. At the core is the me and you, the humans. At the core is still, well, are we just taking a bad process and making it faster? Or are we thinking, well, what's our process? What should we do? And so that's a great thing you brought up. And I will say I have seen this. If anybody wants to head over some of the forums online, you can see some horror stories that are posted on a near minute basis by companies around the world of people saying, hey, my boss is doing this. Because yes, I see places where people like, I refuse to give up my cell number. You can't contact me that way. Why? Because to be honest, it's a horrible place. I wouldn't give him my cell phone. I would give him a burner number, right? And so it kind of comes back to, well, what's the processes underneath? Because the technology, chat in this case, is just going to exacerbate. Imagine a boss walking down the hall every 5 minutes and literally tapping you on the shoulder and be like, hey, I know you're busy, but I need you to do something. So you can never actually do your work. You're being interrupted. Now do that with a ding, 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 or on chat popping up constantly. So we have to harness and leverage chat, in this case, for good. We have to figure out, well, what works best? And your team will tell you. Your coworkers will tell you what works and what doesn't work. There's a nice middle of the bell curve, like 80% that everybody's going to agree. Over here's the ones that are like, well, I can't keep up with that. I think they write scripts to make the responses faster. And over here are the ones that, can I say Luddite? No, I don't mean that in a bad way, but folks that just maybe this is not, your job maybe should not involve hands-on keyboard. Maybe there's something else that you're better at, and we got to get you to there. But there's a nice, healthy bell curve that'll tell you, like, hey, this is what works for us. It doesn't work to get ding, ding, ding at 11 at night. Sometimes, though, with chat, right, it's like, well, don't install the company app on your phone. You're hourly. When you log on at 8 in the morning on your time, 8 in the morning Central Time, Eastern Time, that's when you chat. If we need you, we will call you, be like, hey, we got a big emergency. I'm going to pay you overtime. We do this. But that big emergency should be like once a quarter, once a year. It shouldn't be an often thing. And again, that comes back to the person behind it. And that's a different thing. We can't yet fix them. I'm waiting for those, neural implants. When those happen, then maybe we can help people. That's a big joke for anybody that can't see us laughing.
It's interesting, too, because we're talking about accessibility. We're talking about misuse of technology. So if you have, say, not the best workplace culture, suddenly that workplace culture is still bleeding into your life past when you're technically supposed to be off. So it's that responsiveness, that on demand, that lack of respect for time and boundaries that technology is kind of enabling in these situations.
It is. It's exacerbating. Way long ago, like 10 years ago, I was in a company that had a couple of executives that probably were not the best executives or people. Quite honestly, I think if you hired a camera crew to follow them around, I think that people if they watch that show, they would send them hate mail. They're really bad. And so they used to do things like bed checks, right? They'd come around at 8:05. Is everybody busy at their desk? If you're not at your desk, where are you? Well, I'm in this conference room in a meeting. And at 4:15, they'd go around and they'd see who's left. And technology can exacerbate that. Think about it. If you have a manager, a vice president who's always checking your status in Slack or Teams. Well, why isn't this person here? Why isn't this person here? And so that literally just exacerbates it because they can always say, well, you're green, you're red. Why are you yellow? Because I have to go pee-pee?
So it suddenly becomes a big brother situation.
It is. I'm sure that you heard of the big surveillance that some companies were implementing to see, well, how long since you moved your mouse? And got even worse in higher ed. I don't believe the K-12 system here in the U.S. had it, but in higher ed, read some real horror stories and articles about tracking your eyes so you can see what you're doing during taking a test. Now, that's a little bit of a different thing, right? We're talking about the thick of the pandemic, the first year, really hell, lot of bad stuff going on there, and that was to make sure when someone's taking a test that they're not, like, hey, can you look this up for me? That's taking a test at home. But so I don't want to really get to the higher ed, but rather imagine now your workplace having a camera on all the time, because I have seen those examples as well as, well, why weren't you at your desk? I'm like, well, I put up there, I got to go to the bathroom. Like, oh, okay. But why would you even ask that? We have, I think that's one of the, it's not a segue, I'm not taking us away from it, but the whole return to the office. I have a really good executive, C-level, that she said last year, I think, it might have been late 2020, she said, work is what we do, it's not where we go to. She nailed it. So when people say, like, I don't know what my teammates doing, or more managers, like, I don't know what my team is doing. Do you spend 40 hours a week with each person? Like, how do you know what they're doing all the time? Let's go back to 2018, 19. How did you know what they're doing? And if the answer is, well, I would walk around and see what they're doing, like, but the moment you walk to the next person, how did you know what that person was doing? Most heads explode at that point. But you should have some type of output, right? You should have some type of productivity. You're selling, you're supporting, you're processing claims. You're having something that's quantifiable, as opposed to, well, it was 8:07. Where were you? You were getting coffee? Can't you get coffee at 7:59? And so tech exacerbates that now, right? Of that green, red. Hey, are you in a meeting? Can I talk to you? Like, yeah, I'm actually on a call with a customer. We're trying to fix their software. We're trying to close this deal. So it definitely exacerbates, Russell. And I think that goes back to, as humans, we got to change our behavior, right?
So with chat and new technology, and I hate to bring up generational stuff because I don't find it to be a generational thing when it comes to people's comfort level with these technologies. Because I know people in their 30s and 20s are like, I'm an idiot when it comes to technology. And I know people that are 60s and 70s going, vroom, flying past me. So it's not a generational thing, but it is a Luddite thing. It is I'm not comfortable with that. I'm just going to send you another email again. So how do you introduce new chat technologies to an organization when you do have different levels of comfort to them?
Oh, yeah, definitely not generational. I actually take great umbrage at every time people either say, like, oh, boomer or millennial, because I'm a Gen X. Nobody knows about us, but we created everything. If you go look at, like, all the big companies, all those people that started, all that was Gen Xers. So, hey, shout out to Gen X. I don't believe that it's generational at all. I believe it's just different skill sets, right? Nobody who is, in the workforce today as an adult was born with a smartphone. And yet somehow we've all adapted to at least doing a certain level of communication, right? People like, oh yeah, FaceTime my grandkids all the time on here. So a new technology like chat, I think, is best approached with, hey, we got something new. We're going to roll it out, or maybe we have it, but we're going to roll out some extra cool stuff. Like, one example is my work seasonally will put new backgrounds into Teams that you can use. So for around maybe around Thanksgiving time, I'm not sure when they drop them in there, you get some kind of wintry, Christmassy things, like a Santa. Actually, it's a snowman, and like a there's a beach one, because our office is in Southern California. And so people and they don't really announce them. They just drop them in. And so neighbors will tell people, maybe they are in an office sitting next to each other and processing stuff. Maybe they're just, they chat every day and they're like, hey, Ella, did you see the new background? Go on video. I got to show you. And all of a sudden, like, hey, what are you doing? That's awesome. How'd you get that? And so you put out the good stuff like that. my company actually makes short videos. I think we call them I know we call them Minute Mondays, and they're about 60 seconds. And you know what? We spent the whopping few $100s to buy software, and we got somebody, actually not on my team, but another service desk. This gentleman's excellent, and he makes these videos. It's not him on it. It's literally showing you how to click through and how to install this on your phone, how to do this. So people are like, boom, got it. So let's say somebody emailed. That was your example. Somebody emails. I might ping them back on chat and be like, hey, Joella, I got your email. You got a second to talk? I got a question about it. I figured this might be faster. It might take a second. It might take an hour, but I'll see the typing. Joella's like, yeah, hey, you want to call? I'm like, you bet. What's better for you? Your desk phone or your soft phone or a cell phone or just right here? Do you want to do the video, the audio call? And she said, oh no, here's fine. And so I hit the little button and we'll call. But you're guiding them through it, because if someone says, I'm just not comfortable with that, like, no problem. What's your desk phone? I'll call you on that. So you don't force them, but you kind of incent them through. And we've got phenomenal people who will do that and say, hey, can I give you a call on this? And I agree with it. It's not an age thing. It's just a different skill set, right?
What's the future for engaging technology, for engaging at work through platforms like chat and video conferencing? Are we in the metaverse? Like, where are we going with this?
Companies that embrace technology, embrace flexible work arrangements, are already outpacing other companies. In order to work remotely, there's some requirements, right? You have to have high-speed internet. It has to be dependable. So that's a non-starter of like, well, I don't have it. Like, well, then you can drive into the office. So embracing flexible working arrangements to, maybe you want to work at home. Maybe you want to work at home Monday, Tuesday, so you can drop your kid off. Maybe it's you want to come into the office, but making it so that technology is an enabler of things and not a detractor. A lot of companies trying to really roll out the red carpet for getting people back in the office. Hey, we've got like sit-stand workstations now. We spend a lot of money, and you can come in, sit-stand. Some companies, like, we got hotel cubes. You can reserve a cube. You can reserve a working office if you want. You can do all this. But basically using the technology as something that's good, as opposed to some of the bad things we talked about, like, well, we're going to surveil you, we're going to scrape your data, and we're going to punish you with it. Those companies just keep falling further and further behind. I've got unlimited examples of how that has tried to happen. They generally end up on the news. If they're public, their stock tumbles. If they're private, people throw virtual tomatoes at them. So it's using the technology for good, using chat, using video, using open data and applications, things of that nature.
Well, I'm going to leave it there. But before we go any further, what's the one simple action that people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
Reach out to somebody at work that you haven't talked to in a while. Maybe you haven't talked to them in a week, maybe a month, maybe it's been a year. Reach out to them. Chat's good. Calling them's good. Like, hey, call their desk phone. That'll surprise them. When's the last time they got a call on the desk phone? Unless they work a lot with outside, contacts. And I do that. I also do that kind of in a personal life. Like, I'll call folks from that tech association, and I'll leave a voicemail. I call one of the day. Hey, Tom, how's it going? Just thought about you, wanted to call you. He's actually the host of that podcast or live stream that I used to produce. And so that's the biggest thing. In work, you want to improve your work relationships. It's all down to people. It's reaching out, sending a simple chat of, hey, Sue, how you doing? Just want to see how you are. You got a second? Yeah, what's up? Get on the call. Hey, I just haven't talked to you in 2 years. How are things going? Sometimes that's a 2-minute call. Sometimes it's an hour. Sometimes it builds a bridge that later you're like, I am grateful that I built that bridge. That really helped me in my work environment.
Well, that'll do it. I appreciated using technology to communicate with you ourselves today, Brandon. So that'll do it for this episode. Thanks so much for your time, man.